Hey everybody, today I want to tell you about three things that really made my printing go a lot smoother over the past couple of months. There was a period of about 6 or 7 months where I was just so frustrated I wasn't even trying to print anything. Nothing was sticking to the build plate and I was just having terrible luck. So these three things have fixed almost all of the problems I've had. So I want to share them with you so that if you're having the same frustrations, you don't have to deal with it as long as I do. Now, the first thing is something that's relatively cheap. The second thing is something that's a little bit more expensive. It's a more expensive solution. And then the third thing is completely free. And it's actually one of the things that I think has had the most impact. So make sure you stick around for all three of these things. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is just a simple box store glue stick, just like you would get if your kid was headed off to kindergarten. I even got the purple kind, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But this is a great little tool for getting things to stick to your build plate. I tried all kinds of stuff. I tried sugar, I tried hairspray, tried about everything that you can think of or find on the internet to try, except for glue sticks. And so once I finally tried this, I was stuck because it works really well. And it's really easy and straightforward to use. Here's how I do it. All right, so like I said, pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is, and you can do this 10 different ways, right? It's a little bit of personal preference. I like to start at a corner and just go back and forth. You don't push too hard, just enough to get a little bit to come off, and you'll be able to tell, if you're pushing too hard, you'll see little clumps come up. And if you're not pushing hard enough, you'll see thin little streaks instead of thicker ones that are giving you more coverage. So just back and forth like this for a while until you get, the area that you're going to be printing on covered. Obviously, you don't have to do the whole thing if you're not going to be printing on the whole thing. But when you're done, just let it dry for 4 or 5 minutes to really sink in. Sink in, it's not the right word. But when you're done, just let it dry for 4 or 5 minutes. Just leave it at that. Then, after it's dried, simply come along and rotate it 90 degrees, regardless of however you started, right? Whether you started going back and forth horizontally or from the corner like I did. You're just going to rotate it 90 degrees and then do it again so that you get this nice little crosshatch pattern on there. Now, you probably can't see it on video, but here there's just the faintest little purple that I can see that lets me know where I've covered and where I haven't. Now, the other thing that the purple does is when you go to clean this off after you've printed, it's going to make it very easy to see where you still have glue remaining. When you run water over this, that purple is really going to pop and you're really going to be able to see where it is. So that's all there is to it, really. Let this dry for 4 or 5 minutes too, and then pop it on your printer and you're good. And I find that this almost works too well sometimes. I have a hard time getting the prints off. So you'll probably want to, just adjust how much you push and how much coverage you do based on how well it works for you and your printer. Okay, so the second thing that I'm going to suggest you get, if you can, it's a little bit more expensive than the 30-cent glue stick, is a 3D printer enclosure. So you may have heard of these before, but this is essentially what they are and what they look like. Your printer will just sit inside of it. You can get all kinds. Obviously, you can get a plexiglass one, or you can get something like this, which is much less rigid, much less rigid. And this is what I have. I probably bought something exactly like this. I don't remember the brand, but maybe it may have been the Creality version. But what this will do is just maintain a constant temperature and lack of airflow around your printer. So if you can't afford this, it's not critical. This is probably the least important of the three recommendations that I have. What you can do, it is very important to maintain a constant temperature and maintain a good temperature for printing. But if you can't do it, but you don't have to have an enclosure to do that, right? You can set this off in a room where you have a constant temperature and just make sure that there's not a lot of airflow there. So I'll show you quickly what mine looks like just so you can get a sense of how big they are. I mean, obviously it depends on your printer, but you can see here that this one is a pretty good size. I don't remember the exact dimensions, but it's probably a good 3 feet by 2 feet. They do have, as you can see, very good access in the way that they open up. You can just sort of make them convertible, essentially, and so that works really well. And then they have some holes for the cords to come in. And then again, once you've got a viewing window in the front. So once you close this up, it's got a nice constant temperature for your printing, so you don't have to worry about that variable. Okay, so this third thing that I'm going to talk about is actually probably the most important. In fact, I would suggest that you try this first and then try the glue stick, especially since the glue stick is relatively cheap too. And if those things don't work, then consider getting the 3D printing enclosure. But start with this free thing first that I found to be very effective, and then also go for the cheap thing that's also very effective before you go resort to spending money. So whatever slicing program that you're using, I'm using Ultimaker Cura, is probably going to have a setting for print speed. And you can change this, and if you slow it down, it's going to improve the success of your printing quite a bit. Now, obviously, there's a trade-off because it's going to make your printing slower, so you don't want to just slow it down if you're having fine quality otherwise. But what I found is that this really improved the success that I have with printing and helping things stick to the build plate. So I'm going to show you real quick how to do that in Ultimaker. And again, this is something that will probably generalize to whatever slicing program you're using. So in the quality settings in Ultimaker is if you bring up the details so you can change each of the settings, you'll scroll down about halfway and you'll see a setting called print speed. Now by default, I think it was set to like 50 millimeters per second. And so what I have learned to do is just dial this down a little bit. And what I've noticed is that the smaller or more detailed thing you're printing, the more impact this has, especially if you're printing, something small, that a small first layer, or just a very small piece in general. I had a piece that's probably 10 or 11 millimeters long, and I tried to get it to print all kinds of different ways, and nothing was working. And then I finally just turned down the print speed to like 15 or 20 millimeters per second, and it worked fine. So the more detail and resolution that you have, especially on the lower layers where you're interfacing with the build plate, the more impact you're going to have by turning this down a little bit. And again, it seems to work proportional to the size of the thing that you're printing, right? So if you're printing something small, it's more likely that turning this down will help out a lot. And also, I mean, if you're printing something small, you're going to have less of a trade-off of time. So that's another thing to consider. This again was probably the one thing that had the most impact on my printing. In fact, now I know that if I'm going to be printing something small and intricate or something that I'm sure I want, that I really want to get right the first time around, I'll just go ahead and turn this down a little bit right off the bat. So those are the 3 tips I have for you if you're having trouble getting your prints to stick to the plate. I know it can be really frustrating. I struggled with it for many months until I was able to get it to a place where I feel confident enough with a print now that I know when I start it, there's a very good chance it's going to finish. Doesn't always, but there's a very good chance that it's going to finish these days. So I hope that helps you out. Hopefully you're not stuck where I was, but if you are, hopefully this gets you out of that, or prevents you from even getting there to begin with. So thanks. Best of luck with your printing. Enjoy.